depending on who you believe. So everywhere you go, there's these generators outside the barber shop, there's dozens of generators outside of various businesses, and even there's generator envy. So this was on the homepage of a hotel that I looked up on the web, and they're saying, check out the size of our generator, we'll never run out of power. And this is the primary power system of Nigeria. Now, what has that enabled to happen? Piracy, plus those generators, has bridged the digital divide in Nigeria. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I was at a conference last year in Lagos, and the mobile phone providers were there. Etisalat, which is a Middle Eastern and African mobile phone provider. MTN was there, which is South African and throughout Africa and the Middle East. And they were all saying, we have such mobile phone penetration, we've done it. We've created the infrastructure that will, create the technical future of Africa. And it's true, there's almost 1 billion handsets in the continent of Africa. It's amazing. It's a leapfrog technology story. But what's really driven it actually is piracy. And I found that out by going to this place. This is the Guangzhou Dajiatou Secondhand Trade Center in Guangzhou, China. And in reality, it doesn't sell secondhand phones at all. That's just the misleading name of the place. It sells something called shanzhai. And shanzhai, in China, they don't have the same intellectual property laws that we're used to in Europe and the United States. And so as a result, you get these funny names like Versace without the vowels, and Jomani instead of Armani, and Esgucci. No one's going to sue. I even found there was a company selling leather keychains in the leather mall there with the name Alicia Keys. And Alicia Keys is not going to sue Alicia Keys in China because there's no value in it, first of all, and no one's confusing the musician with the leather keychain firm. So the phones that are being sold in the Guangzhou Dajiatou Center are either with these funny little misleading names like Motorola or the Hi Phone, or they're just straight out pirated. When I was there, Nokia remains the most powerful brand in Africa, even though it's sort of falling apart everywhere else in the world. And the Nokia phones were what people wanted. And so I went into the trade center and I followed these African guys who were carrying boxes out of the Guangzhou Dajiatou secondhand trade center. And out on the sidewalk, where were they going? They were going to Eddie in Lagos. And it's the cheapness of the pirated handset that has, on the street level, enabled everyone to have 1, 2, even 3 mobile phones. And they forced the mobile phone companies to follow suit and lower prices. So when I was last in Lagos, you can get a Nokia stick phone, a little smaller than this, for about 20 bucks. And they also fueled innovation because the pirates started realizing that you need more than one SIM card if you're communicating around the country. And as a result, the pirates made mobile phones that took 2 and 3 SIM cards. And they were so successful that Nokia said, well, we got to pirate the pirates and make our own dual SIM card phone, which Nokia does. They make a 2 SIM card phone and a 3 SIM card phone, which are now available in the Nigerian market. And because the prices came down, more people are buying legitimate phones rather than the pirated phones, because they do, in fact, work better. And as a result, everyone has a mobile phone, and that has fueled the leapfrog technology of wireless services. And this is how you get a charge, okay? You use those smuggled generators to run a business, charging people a couple of cents to be able to charge their mobile phones. And this is where you buy your airtime, from a person on the street. You don't buy it from like some fancy branded boutique. It's very interesting that when I spoke with an executive of MTN, they admitted to me that perhaps 80% of their revenue comes from selling airtime on the street. And What is the reversal of digital justice to me is that MTN has no programs, none of the mobile operators have any programs to work with the street sellers, to reward them, to incentivize them, to send them to school, to do anything like that. So there's no sort of corporate social responsibility for the informal workforce that is producing the bulk of the revenue of these very formal multinational companies. And I would argue, stealing a term that we talked about yesterday, that street vending is spatial justice. And we can look at that in a variety of ways. This is a newspaper seller who sold me my paper every morning in Festock Town in Lagos. He wanders the streets selling papers, and that's a very common thing that we see around here. And that scales up to massive street markets that take over all sorts of portions of the city. You see that people are selling food, and people are selling recharge cards, and people on the bridge there are selling clothing. So it's very dense, and to the point where this sort of tactical urbanism intervention goes even further and takes over entire intersections. Now, this is clearly space making, right? And it's clearly an incredibly vibrant and amazing business model, and there were thousands and thousands of merchants who were working in at the intersection in Oshodi, selling every kind of product imaginable. In fact, there are even folks running informal butcher shops here. They're selling meat, and it was an absolutely incredible place, because I took that photo in 2007, and in 2009 the government did this. Government doesn't like that kind of tactical urbanism. So it's not accepted as a positive intervention in the cityscape. And, we may say, okay, that doesn't go on so much, that's 6 years ago, and, it's not a current problem. This is last week in Accra, Ghana. This was the community, an old and historic community called Old Fadama or Akbul Bloshi, or as it's colloquially known, Sodom and Gomorrah. And yes, Sodom and Gomorrah was a really tough place. There was a lot of bad electronics recycling that was going on there. It flooded from time to time and was a real problem. But there was absolutely no due process. There was absolutely no consultative strategy. There was absolutely no attempt to negotiate a working solution with the people in this community. They just came in. It's also a mostly Muslim community, and the government came in during Ramadan and knocked most of it down, right? So apparently, they said it was blighted and it was decay and all this stuff, but apparently we only like urban decay in boutiques. This is in the duty-free shop in Heathrow Airport when I was on the way here. So we can call urban decay a brand, but we can't actually engage with the people who are, suffering from the consequences of neglect in our cities. So where do we stand? Well, there's still close to 100 billion squatters / slum dwellers in the world. If you read the package of materials for this conference, right, the UN technically has claimed that the Millennium Development Goal on slums was met. The lives of 100 million slum dwellers were improved. And yet the statistics also show that there are more people living in shanty towns than ever, closer to 1 billion than ever before. Right, 894 million, I think we're talking about. So in absolute numbers, the UN's intervention, if it really, and I'm going to be honest about that, if it was anything more than an intervention in how you collect statistics, the UN's intervention did not impact the overall number. And the second thing is that half the workers of the world, 1.8 billion people, work in the informal economy. So ultimately, the value of the informal economy around the world, the back of the envelope sort of calculation, is $10 trillion a year, which means that if we convince them, if they were in one little country all together, they could pay off Greece's debt tomorrow. And they're the second largest economy in the world after the United States. So this is massive, and to pay no attention to it or to act like it's somehow unwholesome and unholy and the people are not worth talking with is, I think, just a counterproductive strategy that will not do anything to further all the wonderful goals that we've been spending so much time working out in this conference. So, is this the product of, I love this picture, this is my favorite car wash in New York, the automated hand car wash. But I think it says something very interesting about Adam Smith and economics, right? Because Adam Smith came up with this wonderful metaphor of the invisible hand. And what is the invisible hand but an attempt to automate economic progress and economic justice? It's saying you don't have to talk with anyone, you don't have to do anything special, all you have to do is keep making as much money as possible, and it's going to produce justice for everyone. And I don't think that that's what's going on here. The automatic process is not what we do in the world. We engage with each other. That's what economics is. And so I think what's happening and what's driving informality and what's driving the increase in the number of squatters and shantytowns in the world is actually the kind of expulsion that Saskia Sassen talked about. It's people who have been expelled from participating with governments, people who have been expelled from participating in the economic structure that is, the way that society is working. And I also think that we need to pay attention to this. This is another image that always amazes me, not as a truth, but a metaphor. This is at the US-Mexico border, right? And so if you want to eat, stay in Mexico, and if you want anything else, go to the US. But the point is, as a metaphor, emulating what we want in the West and what we've become accustomed to in the global North is not necessarily the only solution. And as Richard Sennett said yesterday, that there are all these ways that people do things traditionally in their own countries, and they have to be treasured and learned from. And we have to understand them as efforts that people make to do exactly the same things that we're talking about here, just in a very different way. So I'm going to leave you with two quotes that sort of summarize to me the issue and problems that we face. And the first is from a great British architect and critic and socialist of the last century, who said, "History is written by those who survive. Philosophy," and I would add architecture and urban planning and probably journalism and everything with people who go to meetings like this, "by the well-to-do, but those who go under have the experience." Okay? And the second is from the great Argentine writer, again, of the early 20th century, Roberto Arlt, who said, "Who is going to make the social revolution if it's not the swindlers, the wretched, the murderers, the cheats, all the scum that suffer here below without the slightest sign of hope?" And on that note, I will end. Thank you very much.